she said to me, que sera, whatever will be. The future's not ours to see. Que sera, what will be, will be.
Welcome to the Gen X Multiplex, a 35-year podcast flashback where two former high school movie theater ushers and current-day 50-something film nerds take on the task of watching or rewatching the movies of their youth, the ones that came out 35 years ago in 1989. On this, our final episode, we'll be cracking open our faded yearbooks and dusty murder-suicide diaries, then grabbing some corn nuts, a cherry slushie, and donning our favorite red scrunchie as we go back to school, Westerburg High specifically, for a deep dive croquet and Drano session with Winona Ryder, Christian Slater, Kim Walker, Lisanne Falk, and Shannen Doherty, rest in peace, in the cult classic dark comedy, Heathers. How very. After that, we'll follow Winona into the afterlife as she summons everybody's favorite bioexorcist, Michael Keaton, back from the dead in the 36 years later Tim Burton sequel, Beetlejuice. Thanks to past pandemics, recent strikes, and Hollywood's highly uncertain financial future, there's not too many worthwhile new summer movies in theaters to see. So join us, Matt B. and Brian P., one last time for some old ones in our virtual multiplex, if you please. Well, whatever will be indeed, as we will find out on this final episode of the Gen X Multiplex, the prequel 1989. You heard it in the intro, Brian. Summer is almost over, and so is our prequel podcast in about, 90 minutes? Maybe 2 hours? Maybe an hour? What do you think? Somewhere in there?
Somewhere in there. If we could go back to our original podcast, I think it was a little under an hour, so that'd be nice.
Yeah, we were doing nice, tidy, sturdy hour podcast back in April of 2020, right? With kicking off with Miami Blues there. You think we could get it that tight and lean like in the old days?
Maybe. I know we were doing a weekly back then, but we don't have a whole lot of movies to go over on this one, so maybe.
So what's been going on since last time? It's not been quite a month since our last podcast, getting it out a little earlier this time. Brian, back to school. I think you had real students already in school last time we talked to you, right?
Yep, and it's basically the grind right now. This is the worst time of the school year. It's just getting to winter break. So yeah, same old thing, day in, day out.
Me, not a lot of change on my end. Still searching for that elusive full-time gig that won't get taken over by fake AI. But speaking of AI and AI clones, I don't know about you, Brian, but Bri-AI, whatever, has been coming at me pretty hard with a bunch of pop-up messages. It's been requesting to do some solo reviews, specifically of the movies Afraid and Subservient. I don't know if you have heard about these two AI-related horror movies that hit in the last couple weeks. And it feels like they're coming from or at least Bri-AI is coming from a defensive posture. Seems a little angry, has a bone to pick with these movies because it's portraying AI in a bad light. Have you gotten anything on your end similarly?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because I thought I had shut down Matt GPT. But yeah, I got some weird off message or something about the same thing. Wanted to do a review of Subservience. I was a little pissed, I think, when it found out that we weren't going to be covering any of the AI stuff. So I don't know. Have our AIs been communicating with each other? Are they trying to put together a podcast?
I have a bad feeling maybe we've created not only a two-headed monster. I'm worried they're becoming a little sentient and they're just tucked away and waiting on both of our computers and listening to everything.
Yeah, I don't like it either.
I mean, I'm not giving in to them. I gave a firm no to Bri-AI, and you should do the same with Matt GTP. You should not let them make any headway with this. I mean, one, there won't be any more podcasts after this, so they can't. But I don't want them to try to start their own and pass it off as us.
Well, I don't know if maybe they'll be better. I mean, maybe we should.
Maybe we'll all actually get more than 5 followers if they, if they start their own
right.
and try to pass it off as us. So I don't know. Maybe we shouldn't come down on them too hard. But whatever. Speaking of others who kind of were trying to muscle in on our podcast last time, Brian, have you heard anything? I'm assuming you've heard something because you live with her from Courtney, after kind of leaving a message on the Gen X answering machine last time and giving us a little bit of hell for not including Alien versus Predator in our Alien rankings. Have you? What was the blowback from that like? Because that was at the very end of our podcast last time that she left that kind of damning message, I would say.
Oh yeah, she's still upset that we didn't include Alien versus Predator in our rankings, but then she couldn't give her rankings as well. So there was a bit of a sticking point there, and yeah, she's brought it up numerous times. To me, I keep saying that Alien versus Predator is really probably, if anything, would be in the Predator franchise, because it's about the Predator hunting things, and it just happens to be coming across the aliens. And so maybe you rank him with the Predator movies. She doesn't buy that, though. She thinks it's an alien movie.
I mean, do we know, and do I want to know, actually, where she puts AVP? Has she told you that? Or is it just so much vitriol that you can't even make out where she places it?
What I've gathered, and if I'm wrong here, I'll probably won't hear the end of this either, but she would put Aliens as probably number 1, Alien as number 2, and then Alien versus Predator would definitely be her number 3, because I don't think she likes any of the other sequels that came out.
Oh boy,
she does,
that's just a lot of nonsense. That's a lot of nonsense.
Well, you probably won't like this either. I think she likes Prometheus, but I don't know where she would put that one. But
I'm glad we nipped that problem in the bud last time. Well, although it sounds like it's gonna be an ongoing problem for you.
Thanks a lot.
Yes. What else? Anything else of note? Well, I finally canceled my Alamo season pass. The season pass is gone, so it's safe to say I'm gonna be seeing a lot fewer theatrical movies as we go into the fall. But, you know, on this one last podcast, I still have some homework assignments, or at least one assignment to annoy Brian before all is said and done. There you go. So not a lot of news. We'll get right down to the reason we're all here, the movie that has been referenced more than a few times during the entire run of our show. I think even on our very first show in April of 2020. Here we are again, 4 years and 5 months later, still talking about Heathers, but in a much grander, larger, and surely longer fashion. and here we go. So let's get some appropriate music. And I hear a little bit of Elvis Costello peeking through, coming up. Here it comes. And now for our first and only feature, Heathers.
I used to know a girl and I could have sworn that her name was Veronica. Well, she used to have a carefree mind of her own and a delicate look in her eye. These days I'm afraid she's not even sure if her name is Veronica.
Heather, your mother's here.
Come on, whoever wants to ride. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, girls.
Hey, take a break. Veronica, sit down. So, what was the first week of spring vacation withdrawal like?
I don't know. It's okay, I guess.
Hey, kid, isn't the prom coming up?
I guess.
Any contestants worth mentioning?
Maybe. There's kind of a dark horse in the running.
God damn, will somebody tell me why I read these spy novels?
'Cause you're an idiot.
Oh, yeah, that's it.
You too.
Great pate, but I got a motor if I want to be ready for that party tonight.
Corn nuts.
BQ or plain?
BQ.
You gonna pull a super chug with that?
No, but if you're nice, I'll let you buy me a slushie. I see you know your convenience speak pretty well.
Yeah, well, I've been moved around all my life. Dallas, Baton Rouge, Vegas, Sherwood, Ohio. There's always been a snappy snack shack. Any town, any time. You pop a ham and cheese in the microwave and feast on a turbo dog. Keeps me sane.
Really? That thing you pulled in the calf today was pretty severe.
Yeah, well, the extreme always seems to make an impression. Did you say a cherry or Coke slushie?
I didn't. Cherry. Great bike.
Yeah. Just a humble perk from my dad's construction company. Seen the commercial, right? Bringing every state to a higher state.
Wait a minute. Jason Dean, your pop's Big Bud Dean Construction? It must be rough moving place to place.
Well, everybody's life has got static. Is your life perfect?
Oh, yeah, I'm on my way to a party at Remington University. No, my life's not perfect. I don't really like my friends.
Yeah, I don't really like your friends either.
Well, it's just like there are people I work with and our job is being popular and shit.
Maybe it's time to take a vacation.
So that was a nice juicy clip from Heathers with some of that wonderfully caustic Dan Waters dialogue that we all hopefully know and love at this point. Heathers came out theatrically, not in September, although this is a September podcast. It came out on March 31st, 1989. I'm pretty sure it came out in DC. Pretty sure. I do have vague memories of reading a maybe Washington Post review way back in the day. But it definitely did not come down to our hometown of Fredericksburg. Why? Because it earned, I think, a paltry $177,247, if Wikipedia is correct, in its opening weekend. It was considered a flop at the time. It was hard to market. Neitherworld was going out of business. They were virtually bankrupt. They weren't even able to put in ads in like the LA Times, I think I heard from the commentary.
Yeah.
Became a cult classic, yes, over time and really on VHS. And from my research this last week, the VHS didn't hit until the very end of July. Brian was telling me before we started recording, it was pretty early for a VHS release back in those days. Now it wouldn't be. Things are hitting like 2 or 3 weeks later, depending on how they perform on streaming. That's a pretty short window for 1989, right?
Yeah, definitely.
We know we only saw it on VHS. We did not see it definitely in the RC theater where we worked. We didn't see it in any sort of movie theater. But do we remember when we saw it? Any thoughts, Brian?
No, it's hard to pin down. You're right. Not having the theater kind of as a reference when it came out. We were working there. My question is, did I get it in August? Or did it take me till September or October? I don't know exactly when I would have grabbed it. I have a feeling more than likely you probably saw it before me and told me that I had to see it. That's usually what happened back then, I think.
August. So we've been hanging out like 2.5 months, 3
right.
months maybe.
I mean, we're hanging out enough, I think. But I'm wondering because if ever a conversation came up about anything like Breakfast Club or 16 Candles or any of those movies, I never liked those movies. So I was always bad-mouthing them. So if anything, it might have been a recommendation from you because if you had seen it and said, well, this is not the Breakfast Club.
Yeah, I was like, if you dislike those, then you may love this.
Right. So it might have been coming from that angle because I definitely did not like any of the John Hughes movies back then. I think the only one would have been maybe Ferris Bueller. Oh, and Weird Science, of course. But yeah, so that I would imagine would have to come from that angle. But when, it's a good question because unless you grabbed it off the shelf when it first came out, I don't know if you had to discover it along the lines of maybe renting movies or whatever.
I know I saw it the first time by myself, just watching it on VHS at home. And I'm pretty sure, as we'll find out when we get to our special review portion this time, that I definitely had seen it by October of 1989. So I saw it somewhere between, I'm pretty sure, August and September. I'm thinking probably August. And I was starting to hear about it from other people, and it was starting to buzz around. Like I was talking to some of my high school pals who had also seen it on VHS over the summer. Like lines were starting to be quoted. I'm pretty sure I'm a little hazy on this, but I know I went to like a journalism camp up in Syracuse sometime around then. And I remember whenever I went to that, somebody up there, like 2 or 3 people knew about Heathers and were talking about it. So it was kind of becoming this sort of like, back in the day when you could pass around tapes and you could recommend that when there was no internet and all that. It was like word of mouth was spreading like, hey, have you heard about this movie Heathers? Like it was a true like word of mouth thing building, that it's a really like interesting dark comedy that sort of like savages high school. I actually kind of was more on board with the John Hughes movies. I watched those in middle school, not in high school, because they were like a couple years ahead of me. But that was my impression of high school before I got to high school. And then when I got to high school, I'm like, oh yeah, it's not at all like the John Hughes movies. And it made me sort of retroactively question them. But I was all on board for them when I saw them in like middle school. Like when I'm in like 6th or 7th grade, I'm watching Breakfast Club. I'm like
the future.
Because you're sort of eager to go to high school.
Right.
And you think it's going to be like that. And then when you get there, you're like, oh yeah, no. That's all wrong. Everyone's not friends at the end. And it isn't all about prom. And it isn't all about all the John Hughes stuff. So I was kind of hungry for like sort of a more truthful representation, even if it was through like deadly satire of high school. Rewatched it a number of times through the years. Like, because I think through my 20s, I would watch like Heathers once a year. And then I think once I got into my 30s and like further away from high school, it just didn't seem as urgent. I mean, I still liked it, but it wasn't, it didn't resonate quite as much. And when you had seen a lot of the things played out in like real life, regular general society that play out in Heathers, it's kind of like, oh, I don't need to see this again. I'm seeing it all around me.
Right.
But yeah, that VHS definitely got worn out, and then it got turned, in the early 2000s, I guess it got turned into a DVD. Oddly, it never made the jump to Blu-ray.
I do have the Blu-ray. I also have the DVD collector's edition that comes with like a little mini yearbook and a ruler. So I have a collector's set of Heathers. Like you, once I watched it many, many times, and I'll agree that as the time went on, I watched it less. Even with you, I know that we watch this enough times to be quoting it all the time. So if you're quoting it, you're watching it probably too much.
Yeah, I think we talked about this a little bit before, like the very first time we brought up Heathers. I think I probably know your answer. But in terms of your own high school and your high school experience resembling Westerburg High and what goes down there as far as cliques and things like that and where you fit in, remind us where you were with that stuff.
I didn't hate high school nearly as much as JD and Veronica hate their high school, but it wasn't as bad. Obviously, this movie is way over the top with that kind of stuff. But yeah, there were definitely cliques everywhere. But I fit in like right in the middle. I was probably one of those people sitting at the cafeteria table when they go to their poll that would have gotten like a 3-second clip answering the question, because my little clique of people, we were smart. We were probably more in the nerds category. But we weren't like outcasts. We weren't spitting milk out of our nose. We were just, we were left alone. We weren't bullied. We weren't anything.
That kind of disappoints me that you wouldn't have violently spit your milk out multiple times.
Maybe somebody that I sat with might have. Granimals, as you know him as, might have done that if a girl looked at him. And I would say that my high school was similar. Obviously not as violent. Everything that's going on in that movie, I think everyone can at least relate to on some degree. I don't know if anybody, I don't know if you would disagree with that either. Can anyone watch that movie and not say, from then, I mean, maybe high school is different nowadays, but back then.
Anyone who's gone to public high school, I think, is going to connect to some degree, no matter where you're seated in that Heathers lunchroom.
Right.
Even if you couldn't necessarily like fit yourself within one of those cliques, just the tension of entering, like the political landscape of the lunchroom is fraught with tension. I know it was for me, and I had like a lunchroom incident that I think I've told you about before.
Yes. That
like kind of defined high school a little bit for me. Seeing that at 16, I was instantly tense and could instantly identify even Martha Dumptruck or whatever, like having to enter the room with the tree, getting the food and then turning around like, oh, which table am I going to sit at? Or
right.
what? Even though I had in my high school experience, I generally hung out with like kind of these soccer guys. Up until a point, I had a set place that I would go sit, so it wasn't really a question. But there were certain moments in my high school career where I didn't necessarily know. And I remember that moment of like, oh, where am I going to go sit? Is fraught with so much tension. And you feel it like instantly in that scene where you're panning around and you're seeing the different groups, and some people are very hesitantly sitting down. JD seems fine with not belonging in any of the, in any of the cliques. He's just kind of an observer far outside of everything. Yeah, all that seems immediately true no matter where you fit in. And I think I was someone, it sounds like you're saying you probably, if you had to seat yourself somewhere in the Heathers cafeteria, you'd probably be at the nerd table.
Yeah, probably.
I was kind of like a floater. Like I think sometimes I would sit at what would be like the nerd table. And then when I was hanging out with these soccer guys who turned out to be kind of pricks, but they were kind of not the jocks in the Ram Kurt sense. Like we had definitely a football table, but we were in the South, so it's like redneck football. So they had their own sort of thing. The soccer guys were kind of more like slightly stoners and maybe like had a little bit more money and like they had better taste. in music and stuff like that. When I was watching it this time, like the person that I feel like is probably the closest to where I was most of the time was the guy, the yearbook guy, Peter,
Oh, yeah.
I think his name is, who's like, he obviously has the hots for Veronica.
Yeah.
And I was on the newspaper staff, as we'll quickly find out. Although that was the yearbook. I kept getting it confused, actually. This time I was like, is it the yearbook or is it? No, it's the yearbook. It's not the newspaper staff. And yeah, when I had my little incident in the lunchroom where I was kind of like, all right, I'm totally over this. I'm not hanging out with you guys anymore. I started like purposely not eating in the lunchroom to avoid that whole fraught political landscape of the lunchroom and started eating up in the newspaper staff. So it sounds like yours was definitely, for you, less tension-filled.
Oh,
I
yeah.
would say.
Yeah, I had no problems in high school. I had one of those things like when I went to go become a teacher, all the classes were all like, everyone says they hate their school, high school experience or the middle school experience, and and now you're going to go back and become a teacher. And I'm like, I didn't hate my high school or middle school experience. I didn't hate school, and so I realized then that I'm one of the few that was not traumatized by their schooling.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, how could you go back and do that day to day for a job?
Right.
If the natural route for me is talking about getting jobs is like, I probably should have become an English teacher at some point, but I've kind of never considered it, especially for high school, because I hated my high school
Right.
experience so much and was dying to get out of there.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, our old friend Ed Jones, who we normally go to for a little help, a little assistance in setting up our movies, we can't rely on him this time. Not that we've been able to rely on him for a lot of things in terms of quality of his reviews, but he usually at least had something for us. This time, nah, because like I said, Heathers never came to Fredericksburg, and I can't say with 100% certainty that Ed didn't make the trek to DC to see it himself, but I certainly couldn't find a review in the very brief search that I did from Ed Jones. So instead, we got a little special treat, definitely a blast from the past. I'm going to read my very own Heathers review from the October 1989 edition of the Chancellor High School Lightning Bolt newspaper. I'm not promising you it's any better than Ed's. I can tell you that it's got almost as many copy editing errors as Ed's reviews do. I was a little ashamed when I looked it up this week to see that. But in my defense, this is back in the days, I would write my reviews on loose leaf in pencil, give them to the newspaper teacher, who I'm pretty sure was on like a lot of, was Prozac around back then? She was very depressive, maybe was doing some Black Betties or down, I don't know. She was a very dour woman. And she would type them all into whatever the Apple, what was the computer back in that day, like an early Apple 1989 or something.
Right.
So I'm going to blame all the copy edit problems on her, or like the other person who was the other editor of the newspaper who was in charge of typing them into the computer. Because I know for a fact back then I wasn't using the computer. So let's see. Here we go. I'll rattle the paper so you know it's authentic. You hear that, Brian?
Wow, yeah, look at that.
It's yellowed. It's pretty old. It's the Chancellor High School's Lightning Bolt, October 89, Charger Newsflash, Volume 2, Issue 1. And I guess I need to tell you about how the rating system worked.
Oh.
It's a little funky. I don't quite get it, and I must have made it up back then because I was the only one doing the reviews. I have a whole page to myself, Charger Cinema. Also, you'll love this. I should have done this last month. The largest review actually is Uncle Buck. And then under Video Quick Picks, we have 3 movies. We have Rain Man. We have the movie 1969, also starring Winona and Kiefer Sutherland and Robert Downey Jr. Do you even remember that movie, Brian?
Not at all.
And then finally, Heathers is the last review on page 7, a box with the rating system. Excellent is 3 lightning bolts. Good is 2 lightning bolts. Fair is 1 lightning bolt. And terrible is just a 0. So that was my rating system.
It's a scale of 3?
That's strange, isn't it?
Yeah, that's weird, but okay.
I mean, it's not too far off from our bow ties, I guess, but you won't be surprised to hear Heathers gets 3 lightning bolts, starring Winona Ryder and Christian Slater. I'm going to read it to you with the mistakes in it. Welcome to Westerburg High, where student morale is low and the Cody counts are high. That should be body count. Veronica, Ryder, in parentheses, is fed up with the Heathers, a 3-girl group of snobs all named Heather, and their pretentious backstabbing ways of maintaining popularity. Veronica is prepared to make a stand against Heather number 1, JD, Slater, a new kid in town, is prepared to go even further than that! Exclamation point. Before long, Heather number 1 is dead with the help of some household cleaner and a fake suicide note. Love-struck, Veronica blindly follows JS's ideas on disposing of, literally, the in-crowd at Westerburg High. Westerburg misspelled. JS obviously should have been JD. However, the plan hits a minor flaw when they realize that Heather number 1 is even more popular dead than she was alive. After killing the high school quarterback and his center in another fake suicide, JD and Veronica find that teenage suicide, as crazy as it may seem, has practically become a fad among other students at Westerburg High. Heathers blends dark comedy with symbolism that concerns the never-ending battle to fit in. It creates a shocking yet realistic message about the absurdity of fads, school cliques, and the stereotyping they both involve. Heathers perfectly exaggerates the underlying message that the increasing teenage cruelties of stereotyping, jocks, nerds, skaters, etc., and then with a stray semicolon, I don't know where that came from, could possibly create problems similar to those of Westerburg High. Westerburg spelled a different way this time. So there you go. Did I do an okay job setting up Heathers?
Yeah, you spoiled the crap out of it.
I know. There weren't spoilers in 1989 apparently, or spoiler warnings. Yeah, it was a little heavy on like plot details and less on the review.
Yeah, the last paragraph at the end was a nice little review. Yep.
Anyway, Brian, we've dragged Ed through the dirt through at least 34 episodes. I'm going to give you the opportunity right now, the platform to drag me a little bit based on my 16-year-old review of Heathers. Go for it.
Oh, I wish I had a copy of it in front of me so that I could really pick it apart. But
do you want me to read it again?
No, that's quite all right. But without reading your longer review of Uncle Buck or anything like that, were there just as many errors in all of the other reviews that you submitted?
Yeah, when I skimmed it, it's a pretty error-filled edition of the lightning bolt.
Okay, so
let's put those aside because
yeah,
I can't take the blame for those.
Yeah, okay, I'll put those aside. But no, I mean, other than that, it was a little exposition heavy. But yeah, with that last paragraph was okay. I mean, the stereotypes and the
it's a little earnest. Like it has a little bit of the feel of like I'm 16
sure.
of like homework essay. Because I'm definitely not cracking a lot of jokes in there.
No,
and like right. I mean, Heathers the movie would make fun of the review I just and rightfully
of course,
so.
yes.
As they should.
But I think you liked the movie so much that you were trying to like be like, it's serious in the fact that you have to see this movie. It's that good. 3 lightning bolts would have gotten me into.
As you were clipping out the coupon for a Pizza Hut personal pan pizza, you would have said like, "Oh, I guess I need to see this 3 lightning bolt worthy Heathers movie."
Yes, this high school student is living this experience, so he must know that this is true to life.
Well, the one thing in my defense, I will say it sets up Heathers so that we don't have to go into a lot of plot details. And hopefully after 35 years and the fact that this thing has not only become a cult classic, it's become a musical and a TV series. We shouldn't have to get too much into the plot specifics this time and explain everything, hopefully.
Right.
So it served that purpose, if anything. So let's get to 2024, our rewatch thoughts. I had a little idea on this to do something a little out of the norm, kind of like we did on our first podcast. If you remember way back then, Brian, I gave it, and this is that homework assignment I was talking about up front. Remember way back in April of 2020 for Miami Blues, since that featured Alec Baldwin's character often creating haikus in the spur of the moment. I made us write some haikus, right? You remember that?
I did. I wrote 2. So
this time I figured, hey, come full circle. Let's give ourselves another little writing assignment. I said, why not try and give our 2024 reviews this time in the form of a Veronica Sawyer-style diary entry. As all you Heathers fans know, Veronica is feverishly writing a diary through lots of this movie, and that's where you get a lot of the taste of the great Daniel Waters voiceover and dialogue. It's been famously quoted throughout the years. So Brian, I'm going to let you do the honors since you just very politely sat through my error-filled high school Heathers review.
Yes, thank you for letting me go first, man. Let me get my monocle out. Dear Diary, if you ask some random person on the street to name the best high school movie, they'll probably say something like The Breakfast Club or 16 Candles. These pretty and pink assholes would tell you it reminds them of their youth. Like they actually believe their high schools are some nostalgic wonderland. But they're wrong. Heathers is the best high school movie. It's a movie that perfectly captures the seething teen angst of the late 80s that would explode a few years later with the likes of Nirvana, Flannel, and the whole grunge movement. John Hughes movies are marshmallow fluff. The stereotypes are sickeningly sweet, like the slushies from the Snappy Snack Shack. Heather's is like drinking a Boilermaker, taking those same stereotypes to the absurd limit, then pushing them a little bit further. Even though the movie is full of unbelievable scenes and dialogue as corny as BQ corn nuts, it's all balanced perfectly. If you mix all the colors on a palette together, you usually end up with some brown that's the color of shit. But if you do it just right, you get black. Black like the comedy in this movie. All of the colorful characters, dialogue, and scenes are blended perfectly to produce a jet black, biting satire on high school life. John Hughes fans can just suck on a turbo dog.
Well, I like it. Pretty good. And I think that functions well as a review. I think mine's going to be more in the rant category. Dear Diary. 35 years later, and Veronica and JD's teen angst bullshit still has a gloriously ironic, darkly comic body count. Though I do have to admit, it's fewer bodies than I remembered. If you would have asked me 3 weeks ago, I probably would have told you that only Heather Duke, Shannen Doherty, rest in peace, survived with her marked up copy of Moby Dick intact. I guess I forgot that Heather McNamara was saved by Veronica in the bathroom from wolfing down a bottle of pills. Like Fuck Me Gently with a brain saw. For some reason I also misremembered that Veronica starts the movie already having an in with the Heathers. Why did I think there was some initial Heathers hazing involved before she was playing backyard croquet and passing forged notes and doing lunchtime polls with the titular bitchy trio? I mean, is my memory going to prom or is it going to hell? My concussion-plagued Kurt and Ram brain aside, I think this movie is just as relevant now as it was in 1989. When it comes to pitch-black humor and deftly skewering hypocrisy, both in high school and in general society, it still fucks with the Eagles and will always fly highest. People and politicians are still brazenly exploiting other people's tragedy to stoke their own popularity, only now they're doing it openly on TikTok and Instagram instead of kumbaya sessions in the cafeteria. Weekly school shootings with live Facebook feeds may have replaced handwritten suicide notes, but the same sad problems remain. The kids are not always alright, and their parents are beyond fucked. Brain dead on social media and tech overload instead of imported pate and bad airport spy novels. Why am I still getting my daily news from Facebook? Asked the modern day Mr. Sawyer. Because you're an idiot, says Gen Z Veronica while swiping away at her own Snapchat. Oh yeah, that's it. And that's it for me too, dear diary. Tonight let me dream of a world with Heathers running in a loop on my TV 24/7. A world where Heathers the musical no longer exists. A world where I am free. After all, killing Heathers the musical and all the other pale imitators would be like offing the Wicked Witch of the West. Wait, East, West, Mean Girls the musical, Myriad, Eskimo. God, I sound like a fucking psycho. End scene. Take me to task, Brian.
You definitely were writing a kind of a review as well, where
you see how mine skews more rant than review, though.
Yes.
So there you go. So there was our homework, our Heather's homework, folks. You can grade us silently at home on how well we did, which will lead us to the next portion of our Heather's deep dive, where we talk about the original ending of Heather's, or there were several endings that Dan Waters wrote. But we'll talk about one in particular that he's talked about a lot over the years. Right after this.
Teenage suicide. Talk to it. Teenage suicide. She blew it. Teenage suicide. Talk to it. Teenage suicide. Drugs and alcohol don't mix. No shit. Your lily white is so well. You read my last rites from a credit card. You know my head's too soft and the light's too hard. Teenage suicide. Talk to it. Teenage suicide. She blew it. Teenage suicide. Talk to it. Teenage suicide.
So yes, our Heather's deep dive continues now after a little bit of big fun there. You probably recognize that song, Teenage Suicide, Don't Do It in parentheses, by, I think Big Fun was a made-up band.
Yes.
I'm blanking on the guy's actual name who is the singer. I saw it the other day, but I don't have it. So yes, the original Dan Waters, he was in his early 20s. He was working in a video store, and his idea behind Heather's originally, he wanted to write the ultimate high school movie that he thought would be in the vein of something like Doctor Strangelove, and was really seriously trying to get it to Stanley Kubrick for a while, thinking that Stanley Kubrick would be interested in doing a 3-hour movie about American high schools that was kind of taking a shot at the John Hughes movies. Obviously, Waters never got it to Stanley Kubrick. It obviously didn't end up the final script being 3 hours. It went to Michael Lehman, a director who was fresh out of USC at the time. He had done a kind of successful student film called Beaver Gets a Boner, which I looked for a lot the last couple weeks on YouTube and I can't find. Have you ever seen Beaver Gets a Boner, Brian?
I have not seen it.
But it sounds like it was one of those like, student films that does well and gets a lot of buzz. So he was like set up to be like the next hot director. Waters obviously eventually had to give up on Stanley Kubrick's going to direct this and it's going to be a 3-hour movie. But there were a lot of darker endings, and the one that he's talked about the most, spoiler alert, I guess, if you haven't seen Heathers, in the ending now, JD has the plan to blow up the school. Veronica intervenes with his bomb and ends up shooting off his middle finger as he's giving her the finger. He comes out with the bomb, the sort of debilitated bomb strapped to himself outside of the school. She prepares a cigarette to light when he blows himself up. They have some dialogue. He blows himself up and her cigarette is lit at the end of it. Then she goes into the school, takes the scrunchie off of Shannen Doherty, Heather Duke, says there's a new sheriff in town. And then Martha Dunstock, the overweight student who almost committed suicide, motorized wheelchair, she goes up to her and says, you want to go home and rent some movies and pop some popcorn and stuff. Martha Dumtruck says, I'd like that. Rolls around her, credits roll, different version of Que Sera plays. That's the ending as it exists for anyone who hasn't seen it, or just a reminder. Brian, you want to tell us what the one that Waters originally wrote, or one of the ones?
I read this screenplay, actually. I went on the disc and I read it. In one of the endings, the bomb actually goes off. And it goes to white or whatever, and then you start to hear some music, and you fade into a prom scene in a gym. You see, and there's not a lot of dialogue in it. It's just all a bunch of visuals of all of the different cliques and all the different people in the school and all the people that were blown up, plus the people that they killed earlier, Heather, Chandler, and Kurt, and they're all dancing to the song. And then what they do is they start switching partners up. So as they switch, like the different cliques are mixing together, so the jocks and the nerds are dancing together, and they all start switching up between them all. And then it pans up to Veronica standing up above them, smiling down and seeing all of the happiness, I guess, in heaven.
You did your homework better than me, it sounds like, because you actually went and read it. I think maybe I read it like a really long time ago, like maybe back in college. But I knew there was like the school blows up, everyone dies, and there's a prom in heaven, basically. So I knew it. That's like the shorthand original ending. But yeah, obviously the studio said, yeah, we're not doing that. You're already towing the line way too much with a lot of the subject matter in here. Veronica, Winona Ryder, is supposed to be kind of like the audience surrogate. She's like the only ray of hope. Even though she goes along with this for a while, she eventually, gets wise to it and resists JD. And, they were like, what is the message you're sending if even we don't have her at the end? And she goes up in smoke with the school. They were worried about like a lot of copycat suicides, bombings, understandably so. And yeah, that might have been also too just easy of an ending. It's kind of like, it's definitely got that whole like fresh out of film school edgelord, I'm gonna do the darkest version possible ending with total disregard for anything but being like, yeah, fuck yeah. It's like that kind of thing. And it sounds good. I don't know. How did it strike you when you read it? Like, do you think that's a superior ending, or do you prefer the one that as it exists now?
I find it almost a little, like you just said, it almost feels film schooly to do that. Like, I don't mind this ending, the original theatrical ending, only maybe because I know it so well and that's what I'm used to. But the idea of having this like dream sequence at the end with everybody kind of like getting along. JD says that at some point in the movie, right? The only place two people could really get along is in heaven or something like that. So he alludes to that. And so there they are all up in heaven. dancing and getting along.
So they are getting along. See, like the way
Yeah.
I heard him describe it before, it just sounded like it was more like a Kubrick surreal kind of like 2001-y sort of like where you just, you hear like kind of very bland prom music and people just dancing like mannequin-y, like where they're like observing. I thought it was going to be something more
they were
like
supposed
cold
to be switching
like that.
partners. The whole thing on there was that they were switching partners and that everybody was dancing together. So all those cliques they were switching partners up and they were all dancing with each other.
Well, that sounds John Hughesy. That's very
Right.
antithetical
That's why
to...
I don't know that I really like that. I mean, again, he says it in the movie, and I could see how that could be play out. But Kubrick version of it, like being all sad and droll and all that stuff would be awesome. But I think the way it was supposed to work out that the only place everyone can truly get along is in heaven. Blah blah blah. I prefer the ending as is. I don't know. What do you think? Do you like the idea?
Yeah, I mean, no, it's still definitely a grim ending. It's not like a cop-out ending at all. Like on the commentary, like it sounds like Waters still thinks they kind of gave in a little too much to like the producers. Yeah. It sounds like Lehman and Denovi, the producer, don't, and it sounds like they were kind of glad to have to like kind of rethink it and like be forced to like come up with an alternative that wasn't just like school blows up, everyone dies, and we get an FU prom in heaven sequence.
Right. There was another version
or surreal thing. It's well, if it was handled in a certain way, I could see it working. So I'm not anti that. But the one you just described me, where it's about like the cliques all getting along, that probably wouldn't work for me.
Yeah, I don't know. There was a version, I think, that what I said, she straps the bomb on herself and she blows up, and like they find the note in her locker that says, "Pretend I did blow up the school. Pretend I blew up all the schools. Now that I'm dead, what will you do with your life?" There was that version where she blew up, but I don't know that she blew up the whole school. So I mean, there's a couple different ones out there. But when we start talking about those adaptations and some of the things that they put back in that were in the original script, like I mean, I even like the Snappy Snack Shack. On the commentary, they were claiming how they really wanted it to be 7-Eleven, and they didn't like the fact that they had to change it at the last minute because 7-Eleven said that once it got up the chain, they were like, "Oh no, we're not doing a movie like this," and so they were kind of like, "Oh, we kind of wish it was 7-Eleven," and I'm like, I love the Snappy Snack Shack. I think it's great, Turbo Dogs and all that. The fact that it's not really realistic, but they claim it is. I love that. But then you watch the musical, and guess what? It's a 7-Eleven. So here I am pissed off seeing 7-Eleven and not seeing the Snappy Snack Shack. But if you hear the director talk about it and the writer, they're like, "Oh yeah, we kind of wish it was a 7-Eleven." I'm like, I don't want big gulps and Slurpees. I want slushies and Turbo Dogs. So
you want a super chug?
Yeah, I want a super chug.
You're gonna pull a super chug.
Yeah, I mean that adds to it if you ask me. So if they got some of the things that they wanted, I don't know that it would have worked. Like I said, it's a fine balance the way it is. Don't mess with it.
The good side of like independent filmmaking is it sometimes forces you to remove some of your amateurish stuff for budgetary reasons, and then it ends up being better. I mean that happens all the time, and I think it happened more than a few times probably on this movie. I wonder, is it possible that our good pal Jeff M has never seen Heathers?
Oh no, he has to have at least seen it once. We've had to have browbeated him into seeing it at some point.
Yeah, we talked about it so much, it's almost like he couldn't have hung out with us for that long and not... Like, he would just want to know what the hell we were talking about and what lines we were quoting all the time.
Sure.
I'm sure it's very safe to say he didn't watch it nearly as much as us.
No.
But would he have watched it if they got the original cast that apparently was lined up? Definitely in the getting close to casting stage. Why? Because it was originally going to be, for a while, Jennifer Connelly as Veronica Sawyer. They also had Heather Graham as one of the Heathers, but her very religious parents said, absolutely not. You're not going to say these things. Of course, comically enough, within the same year, she ends up playing a heroin addict in Drugstore Cowboy. But it's more like they just didn't want her to say some of the fouler things that are said in Heathers. I guess she can do disturbing things, but can't say them.
The funny thing is Heather McNamara didn't really say all that much odd stuff. I mean, she was going to be Heather McNamara, and I was like, wow, they didn't like what she said. I guess maybe they didn't like the whole tone of the movie, but like you said, Drugstore Cowboy, and then she was like Roller Girl in Boogie Nights, wasn't she? I'm like,
yeah.
It's like, good lord.
Yeah, it's just funny that she wasn't in it because of like prudish parents, and then what ended up being her career like soon after that. It's kind of funny. There was also Justine Bateman was lined up for a while. Yeah. Brad Pitt came in for a read. Yeah. This could have been a very different movie. I love Jennifer Connelly, but I don't know if she could have given us the same level of sarcasm.
No, I don't think so.
I mean, I think this is the perfect Winona Ryder role.
Yeah.
And it's obviously no surprise that I had like a big old crush on her after this movie.
And it's one of her favorites, right? She claims this is her favorite movie she ever made. So.
Oh yeah. So I don't know. Like, although I'm sure Jeff would be first in line for Jennifer Connelly Heathers.
Right.
I would maybe second in line out of curiosity, but it's just hard to imagine. It's interesting to imagine, but hard to imagine. Right. So we did a little bit of deep dive into Daniel Waters' post-Heather stuff. I know I threw some things out at you, but I don't know what Brian actually watched or got to. Do you want to tell me how far your dive went with Daniel Waters?
I watched them all, and I hate you for it, but I watched them all.
Nothing. You found nothing of value in any of these? Diminishing
returns is all I could say. Is that?
Well, I'll agree with you there. Chronologically, it is diminishing returns,
yes.
But I found some value in some of this stuff. It wasn't a complete wash for me.
It's a typical example of an artist that creates one great thing, and all they're trying to do is try to get back that magic again, get that lightning back in the bottle again. It felt like that as he's going along, and it's just I felt bad for him almost. I mean, the movie Happy Campers, you want to talk about that one? That's the first one I watched. I don't know if that's the first one that came out after.
That was the first one that he directed himself.
So let me take that back then. I watched all of his directed stuff again, or for the first time. The stuff that he wrote, actually, I don't hate everything he wrote. I'll take that back. I actually like the movie Demolition Man, and I didn't realize he had written it. And I
think it's safe to say that he's a better writer than he's a director.
Yeah.
Like, no one's going to argue that. I think he wouldn't argue that.
But the problem is that when he writes stuff, like he wrote Batman Returns, which is pretty decent. He wrote Ford Fairlane, which wasn't that great. But some of the stuff he wrote...
Hudson Hawk. Yeah, we've covered a good amount of his movies.
But when he directs his own stuff is when he's trying to go back to Heathers, I think. Because those other ones aren't nearly as over the top with the dialogue, like Batman Returns and all that stuff. That's not too overly stylized. He's not trying for these like clever sayings and these like little quips and quirky or weird.
Well, he's reined in by like the pressures of a franchise and fitting into like a franchise and then fitting into Tim Burton world too.
Right, and then
which actually I think helps him a little bit.
Right, and I think even with Demolition Man, you probably had like Stallone pushing him, like whoever. I don't even know who directed Demolition Man, but I actually liked the movie, and so when I saw that I didn't realize he had written that. So those things I think are fine. What I really had to go through is go back and look at all the stuff that he directed, and that's the stuff was painful to watch.
I mean, his filmography tails off after Vampire Academy, the movie he wrote for his brother Mark Waters,
right? Which
is basically like Twilight fan fiction-y.
Yeah,
I definitely did not know before doing our little deep dive what Vampire Academy was, and I'm ashamed to say now that I somewhat know a little bit. You can tell just like 5 minutes in the movie. It's like this came from something else where the viewers is expected to already have bought into this lore and know it was for me. I don't know. Did you watch it?
I did.
For me, that was the experience for me of watching a Marvel movie these days. It's like going into something where they're referencing things in the first couple minutes that they expect you to already know and just throwing it around. Did you feel that way watching it?
Yeah, I mentioned Vampire Academy to my dog Juliana, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to watch this Vampire Academy. She's like, you're watching that? I'm like, have you heard of it? She's like, yeah, because my daughters watch all that YA, like you said, Twilight stuff, and that kind of like, usually they'll watch anything that gets thrown out there. Now, she has not watched this, but when I said, I'm like, man, this thing is bad, she goes, well, you're not the target audience. I'm like, yeah, I could tell. This is definitely tuned to like 16, 15, 14-year-old girls that are into kind of like that Twilight-y magic, the counter Harry Potter. If Harry Potter's too much boyish kind of thing, this is the girl vampire teen fantasy crap. I mean, and you're right. It's all a bunch of rules thrown at you in this world that no one gives a shit about. But he wasn't trying for the weird dialogue, though. I will tell you that he was not. This is the first movie I watched them in order, and that was the last one that he had made. So it felt like he's almost like, oh, okay, I guess I'll write something, and he just.
It definitely felt like he'd given up by then.
Right.
I mean,
let's
be honest. I don't think he had worked in a while. His brother is Mark Waters, who directed Mean Girls,
right.
Which people can argue is kind of a more user-friendly version of Heathers. It's kind of I did rewatch that too because I'd only seen it once. A long time ago, and I get why it's enduringly popular. It is pretty good, but it does feel like it feels like a Saturday Night Live skit version of Heathers.
Well, yeah, it's written by Tina Fey, but that's probably why it was better, is because it was a better writer. I mean, I hate to say it, I'm like that. If it was,
you think Tina Fey's a better writer than Dan Waters?
At that point, yes. if I compare Vampire Academy to Mean Girls, Who do you think's the better writer?
Yeah, but that's not fair because Tina Fey doesn't have a Heathers ever under her
Well, I know,
belt.
but that's, again, if you're going to say, okay, if you're going to compare everything that Daniel Waters wrote to everything Tina Fey wrote, yes, Daniel Waters has Heathers, that puts him on top. But if you remove Heathers from Daniel Waters, his one hit, he's a one-hit wonder. If you take that away from him, I mean, yeah, he had a couple nice hits with Batman Returns and a couple others.
I thought Batman Returns was good. Script wise, I think there's good stuff even in Fairlane and Hawk. I actually thought there was some good stuff in Happy Campers, but he's not a good director of his own material.
No, but Happy
like he
Campers...
actually weirdly, writers a lot of times who turn to directing get the rap for like being too precious with their dialogue, and it seems like everything is directed to highlight their precious words.
Yeah,
he seemed like the opposite. Like a lot of the actors he got were like kind of sort of mumble mouthing his words, and like he was cutting in such a way that it was like stepping on his lines and stuff. It's almost like when I was watching that movie, I'm like, it seems like Daniel Waters is really sick of his own dialogue or is kind of like embarrassed about it. And that movie was basically just like Heathers in
a camp.
Yeah.
That's why I hated it. It felt like he was trying to, maybe I could recreate that magic. And maybe that's a bad thing that I'm now comparing everything to that success. But
I don't know. I thought there was some good stuff in there. It wasn't like a successful movie front to back. Same thing with Sex and Death 101.
That was way too long of a movie.
That was his second and last directing effort, but it was his reuniting with Winona, who had been badgering for years in between to get him to try to write Heathers 2, which we'll talk about later.
Right.
Which doesn't exist, but she really desperately wanted it to exist for like the last 35 years. So none of that worked for you either? Nothing?
No, Sex and Death I thought had an interesting concept at first, but the execution, again, the pacing of that movie is just horrible. It takes way too long. It just... None of the timing
It's very
works.
long for a comedy with that setup.
And it makes the timing of the jokes don't land. I mean, Simon Baker's kind of I'm not a huge fan of his, but
that was bad casting.
Casting there. Again, trying to feel like he's kind of trying to be a little different and quirky to give that.
Yeah, but at least that one, that was him. It seemed like at least him trying to stray away. Like it wasn't set in some other version of a school.
Right, it wasn't
like
teens.
that was him trying to do like his version of a romantic comedy.
Yeah.
With hopefully some bite to it. And like, I don't know, and some of the jokes worked. It was too long. Not great casting. You kind of know that the Winona Ryder serial killer character, they're going to kind of end up together, or at least
surprises.
Their stories are going to dovetail. So that like there's not a lot of surprise, so you're just kind of waiting for it to get there. The Vampire Academy one was like it feels like he's not even trying. Like this is just a pure and simple job.
Yeah.
That one was one of the ones where like 10 minutes in, I just started doing other stuff and left it on the background just to hear if I would hear a stray like interesting Waters style line, and I don't think I heard anything. But I think one hit wonder is harsh because I think he's contributed good things script wise. And other things, and at least one of his directed movies is not a total throwaway.
Okay, so he's like an artist that had like one good album. So they had one hit song and a couple decent ones, and everything else is crap. I mean, I don't want to badmouth him because he did write Heathers, and I think it's great. The rest of his stuff, like especially once you get out of the mid '90s, is pretty bad. Because when they marketed Vampire Academy, if you look at the poster, it says from the director of Mean Girls and the writer of Heathers, and you're like, oh my god, this is going to be a masterpiece. And of course, you're like, what the hell is this piece of shit? I'm wondering where the talents are really in all of this. But
will you at least say of the two Waters brothers that Daniel is the more talented?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Definitely.
I can't sway you at all on the one hit wonder, it sounds like, but I can sway you on who is at least the more talented Waters brother.
Yes.
All right, and Layman, we didn't say we didn't have any homework assignments specifically with him. We already gave a lot of time to Meet the Applegates and Hudson Hawk on our previous podcast. I would say his post Heathers career was more unremarkable than Waters to me. Airheads, I don't even remember that. Truth About Cats and Dogs. 40 Days, 40 Nights. And then he did, like when he veered into TV finally, probably out of necessity to keep working, he has been, like, attached to some good shows, like some Nurse Jackie, some Bored to Death. He did a lot of HBO stuff, He did some Big Loves, The Comeback.
It's funny, I'll see his name pop up every now and again. I'm like, oh, Michael Lehman. I think I do like some of the stuff he did for television, some of the random episodes I might have seen, but once again, I think that Heather's, that was the right mix right there. I mean, Denise Denovey, we didn't talk about her. Isn't she like Burton's person? Didn't she go?
Yeah,
off
I think from Heather's,
Yeah.
she kind of got the Burton gig.
Yeah.
And started working with him pretty. I mean, I know for a fact she did like Ed Wood, and
Yeah.
I mean, she's probably had the better career than either of those guys.
Right,
really,
right.
It just. But I mean, she's less of a creative, but still has probably been attached to, let's say, more successful movies.
Right.
But anyway, so we talked about the people behind the camera enough. Let's take a little musical break with a little clip from a music video Winona was in 1989. She's a fan of Mojo Nixon. Take it away.
Debbie Gibson is pregnant with my two-headed love child. It's a Bigfoot baby, all covered in fur now. Stark raving naked in a fornication nation. We were secretly married out in Las Vegas. Had a little bit of chapel. Joe Collins made us. Rootin' tootin', ain't highfalutin.
So let's talk about Winona and Christian really quickly. I think we kind of said we weren't super familiar with them the first time we saw Heathers in 1989. We don't need to do a whole blow-by-blow of their entire filmography. Just generally, thoughts on post-Heathers Winona, going strong post-Heathers, that really set her up for like a very storied career, definitely through the 90s. I mean, she was in Reality Bites, which a lot of people say is like the signature, or at least one of the signature Gen X movies.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you feel that way.
No.
I mean, I think it's pretty good. It's definitely not one of my favorites. On one of our also-rans earlier this summer, Great Balls of Fire, she was in that the same year. Edward Scissorhands, of course. Bram Stoker's Dracula. She worked with Scorsese on Age of Innocence. Yeah, I mean, her 90s resume is very strong. And then around towards the end, a little bit after Alien Resurrection, I guess Girl Interrupted was kind of popular, right? But that was more so for Angelina Jolie, I think. But that was around where she had the shoplifting thing, right?
Yeah.
Somewhere around 2000. Went through a little sort of fallow period because I think people were still figuring out, okay, what's up with Winona? Beginning of the 2000s was a little spotty, let's say. She did pop up in a Linkletter movie, Scanner Darkly. Mm-hmm. She was getting, let's say, supporting parts for a while. Sex and Death 101, which you just talked about. Black Swan in 2010 was somewhat of a career resurgence. And then I guess the big thing that kind of pulled her back out of semi-obscurity would be Stranger Things, of course. Mm-hmm. General thoughts on Winona, Brian. Did you have a crush on her, first of all?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think I liked hearing that the little history of how she got Heathers was that she was on the set of Beetlejuice. And then the writer of Beetlejuice apparently had a hold of the script for Heathers, and she got a hold of it. She liked it so much that she was like, I'm dying to do it. I'll do it for $1 or whatever. You know, she was only 15 when she made Heather. She turned 16 on the set, which I was shocked to find out about. I just assumed she was older since the material is so...
Yeah, no, she's only like a year older than us.
Yeah, it definitely was like, if you asked if I had a crush on her. So yeah, she was actually age appropriate as opposed to gawking at some of the older girls that were on the screen. I liked her in those movies you mentioned. The couple after this, you know, I saw Dracula and all that stuff, and I know she's done a couple movies with Keanu Reeves. And I remember for some odd reason when Age of Innocence came out, like she got like bad mouth because the whole movie kind of got a little dragged. I think when Age of Innocence came out, but wasn't she like nominated for that?
I believe she was.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I just for some reason remember that people like didn't like her in it, like she didn't feel like she fit the part. But then I'm like, well, she got nominated. But I remember back then, like kind of like hearing that, and I'm like, hey, I like Winona, so I had no problem with it. It's strange because when we talk about Christian Slater in a moment, he almost had the same thing. I mean, she had a shoplifting incident. She had a little bit of a PR problem, and she had to kind of get back on it. But you know, like you said, after Alien Resurrection, there wasn't much going on for her anyway. Now, I don't know, maybe that boredom is why she started shoplifting. I know she said she had issues and problems, but Christian Slater had the same weird dip in that same time frame, and it took him to have a TV show to kind of pull him back out of obscurity. They were all still working a little, like here and there, doing like random crap. Slater started doing a lot of weird little TV shows that no one really saw. I don't know why both their careers, and I don't know if it was just that the transition to the 2000s and a new generation of, you know, Ryan Phillippe's and Sarah Michelle Gellar's and all that stuff starting to come along and replacing the roles they were playing. But I thought it was odd that they both had the same career dip.
Yeah, it's a simple. His was more drugs related. I think he had some alcohol and some like drug problems. And it's also just the whole aging out of like you're
Yeah.
in that weird area. Like, okay, you can't play teenagers anymore. You can't play fathers and mothers yet.
Right.
And you're if you're not like an action person, which Slater, I mean, they try. He was in Broken Arrow.
Yeah, he was.
They kind of like slotted him in a little bit to the action roles, but he didn't. Those movies didn't do that well. So
Right.
it's like people weren't banking on him on that. And you surprised me with how much you liked Humble the Volume on one of our earlier episodes. That
Loved
was a
it.
post Heather's success. Mobsters, not so much. I mean, True Romance, of course.
Right.
That's right up his alley. He gets to be. I mean, that's kind of borderline action, but he gets to be cool, hip, sarcastic.
JD again.
Kind of a version of JD. I mean, I'm not as big a fan of True Romance as a lot of people
No,
are.
not either.
It's more of a Tony Scott problem than a Tarantino problem for me. Mid to late 90s, you can tell they're kind of trying to find places for him. It's like Bed of Roses, they're putting him in straight rom-coms with no sense of Heather's sort of sense of humor. And in the same year, they're putting him in Broken Arrow. So they're positioning him as a rom-com guy and also like a John Woo action guy, not really working. Hard Rain, very bad. Yeah, somewhere around 2000, he starts going from being the top billed guy to like supporting, and that's kind of where you're in the wilderness a little bit.
It's funny how you mentioned too old to play the young people and too young to play the parents. Both their resurgence come with Winona Ryder playing the mother of the missing child, and in Mr. Robot, Christian Slater is the father of Rami Malek. If that's not a spoiler, if you haven't seen it, but
I watched like the first 2 seasons of that. Is he actually his real father?
yes, yeah, it's his real father. I mean, I love Mr. Robot. I thought it was great, but yeah, it's he's his dead father.
Winona was definitely like miscast in some things where I'm like, this is definitely not playing to her skill set. Like when she has to play too earnest, she doesn't always work. Like I think she needs sort of that ironic veneer to work off of in the writing, which is probably why like a lot of people liked her in Reality Bites, because that's definitely tapped into the whole Gen X ironic thing. But like things like, I remember like sort of even in Dracula, like wincing a little bit at some of her line readings. I thought she was pretty good in Age of Innocence. I don't know if she was like Oscar worthy. Like, some of the criticisms, I'm like, I can see that criticism. I'm not totally on board 100% with it, but like I see what you're saying.
Right.
But neither one of them have ever like full on disappointed me. They've always been pretty solid, reliable actors. Maybe not ever ascended to the Heathers heights.
Not at all.
Yeah, initially, like a lot of people, the very first time I saw Heathers, it took me like 10 or 15 minutes to be like, this guy's just doing a fucking Jack Nicholson impersonation. And then it grows on you within the movie, and then definitely after you start watching other things that he's in, you're like, no, this is just him. This is kind of like what he does. I mean, he did say that he had seen like Witches of Eastwick a couple times right before doing Heathers. And he even has like, I forgot what line it is. When I was watching the other day, he gives some line reading. I'm like, that is the exact Jack Nicholson Witches of Eastwick line reading. Like to a T. Enough bullshitting about them probably. Unless Brian, do you want to hear my really not much of an anecdote about almost meeting Winona when I was at NYU?
If it's a good enough story to tell, go for it.
It's probably not, but I'm going to tell it anyway. It was just basically like one of my friends that he was at a bar in Greenwich Village, and I had already like struck out a lot. I realized really early on at NYU, and this might have something to do with all those goddamn movie posters I took with me up there and put in my dorm room wall. I wasn't having a lot of luck, blindly walking up to girls in bars and introducing myself and doing that thing. You have to kind of learn to do pretty quickly going to school in New York, because there's no frat culture or Greek life really sort of thing. So it's like you're instantly thrust into kind of like a bar scene, even though you're sort of too young to do it. And I definitely looked too young. So I think I was suffering from a little, some stings from that having not gone too well. Then my friend calls up and he's like, Matt, Winona Ryder sitting right down from the bar for me right now. Be here in 10 minutes before she leaves. And believe me, I thought about it long and hard. He left it. This was an answering machine message, so there was a little less pressure. I didn't have to if he had gotten me actually on the phone, I probably would have gone. But I mamby-pamby went back and forth a lot, and there's no way I'm just going to be a blubbering, stuttering mess worse than just a normal girl that I would walk up to, which I'm already not so good at just rolling up blind. Like I think I got dressed, started to go, and then as I was thinking of what I would say, on the elevator way down. I think I actually got into the elevator, talked to myself out of it, and my friend Andrew might have also been talked me out of it and said like, yeah, no, you will totally screw this up.
Oh man.
So I didn't end up going. This is why it's a non-anecdote, but I regret it to this day because why not shoot that shot? Why not like take it? I mean, if you're gonna screw up, who better to just completely whiff that on?
Yeah.
You know, at least you could say I completely failed in trying to hit on Winona Ryder at a bar in Greenwich Village. You know, and like you said, it would have been age appropriate. It wouldn't have been that. It would have been success inappropriate because I was like first year, second year film school, and she already had a thriving career at that point. But whatever. So you know, definitely some regret there. But not much of a story.
That's okay. She ended up with Johnny Depp, so I mean, she lost out.
Speaking of non-anecdotes and things that shouldn't have happened, why don't we talk about the Heathers legacy and the two Heathers adaptations they made? One being somehow very popular Heathers musical and the very canceled 2018 Heathers TV series. After the break.
Act our age, you heard the man, it's time to rave. Blast the bass, turn out the light, ain't nobody home tonight. Drink, smoke, it's all cool, let's get naked in my pool. Punch the wall and start a fight, ain't nobody home tonight. His folks got a waterbed, come upstairs and rest your head. Let's rub each other's backs while watching porn on Cinemax. The folks are gone, it's time for big fun. To lock the liquor cabinet, it's big fun, big fun.
So yeah, that song was from the Heathers musical, which, as Matt mentioned, is very beloved for some reason. But I guess you have to have that mindset. You know, there are some people that are just like theater people, and they love anything that you put on the stage. I guess if people are singing and dancing, suddenly it's a masterpiece. But yeah, I think it came out as a musical actually in 2010, right? Is that when I think it hit the stage?
Somewhere around there, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, I guess I get it, you know, and I understand like the money making concept behind it, but obviously, you know how I like the movie so much that I think that if you start tinkering with it or you start messing with it, you're just not going to be able to get that same feeling, the same vibe, the same excitement or the quality. With the musical, they have to make adjustments for it, right? So you have to make it longer. You have to add songs. It looks like they added like the 7-Eleven. They added elements that might have been originally in the script. But I will say that it came on, they're singing, and you know what? I don't mind music. I don't hate them. I know your history of musicals, Matt, but I don't necessarily hate them wholeheartedly. Like, I didn't mind Hamilton. I watched Hamilton. I was able to sit through it. I liked it. And there's some ones I could kind of make it through, and I'm fine with. But see, this is touching a beloved property, and so I was immediately kind of like biased against it. And right off the bat, they're giving a backstory about Veronica and how she became friends with the Heathers and how she wanted to fit in with them at first. And that might be true, but in the movie you don't get that. And I almost appreciated the fact that the movie had a character was already in the cool clique. She wasn't being bullied by them. Like a lot of the teen movies, you always have like, you know, the kids being bullied, then all of a sudden maybe they infiltrate the bullies and they're gonna, you know, mess with them or something like that. But like in Mean Girls, but in the musical they had to have this whole song and dance, literally a song and dance about how her and Betty Finn were friends, and then, you know, she had to go in and really wanted to be friends with the Heathers, and then of course when she becomes friends with the Heathers, she realizes how bad they are. And just to be honest, I did not make it all the way through the musical. I think it's like 2 hours and 15 minutes. I made it about 45 minutes into it. I listened to a couple of the songs. My daughters were in the room with me. I was watching it, you know, just on TV, and they knew the music. And I'm like, how the hell do you know this? You know, how do you know the music? They're like, oh, it's all over TikTok. I'm like, really? So what, you know, TikTok likes to do is take like bits and pieces of anything and just give it to you in like little 15-second sound bites, right? So they knew like these like little lines from the songs, been well received. But I want to know how many of the people that love the musical actually like the movie. And I would almost say that a lot of those people, they come on cutting to the audience. I'm like, a lot of them probably like the movie and they like the musical as well. But I guarantee there's a lot of people that like the musical that if they go and they watch the movie, they'd probably be like, what's this?
Yeah, the characters are they completely warp and change the characters.
Yes.
That's where I left it playing, but I had my attention on it for, I would say, 10 or 15 minutes, and then just started doing other things and left it on. So I wouldn't call that really watching it. So I probably really bailed about the same time as you did mentally bailed, because I'm like, in order to justify it being longer and having things to sing about, they're putting words in their mouth that, one, I don't even think the original characters would ever have thought, much less said out loud, much less sang out loud.
Right.
And it's just like there's no resemblance. And I tried to enter this with a very open mind because, I'm not a musical person, but there are musicals that do dark subject matter and still maintain like somewhat of an edge and do it well. One we might talk about a little bit later. I mean, I liked Sweeney Todd.
Sure.
And that's a very dark, I mean, there's like murders happening all over the place and people being made into meat pies.
Right.
And stuff. And you can do it and maintain like a dark or at least playfully dark tone. This one just completely jettisons it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we watched probably the same version. There might have been other casts that were better than the one we watched, but man, the one in this was just like, there's this girl with this like a really thick Chicago accent who was like, I'm like, this should be a musical about the Chicago Bears, not about it. Like, what the hell is this? And then the guy who's playing JD. Yeah, no, and I mean, worse, the guys who were playing Ram and Kurt.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm sorry, these guys have never touched a football in their life before this. And I really tried to have an open mind about it for about 10 or 15 minutes. And I'm like, these are just like, they've just completely thrown away any connection to the original characters and the original tone. It's like, it's making the subtext of the thing and trying to turn that into the text and failing miserably.
I have to ask you this. Did any of the original trio were involved with the making of this musical?
Well, you're thinking like me, Brian, because the first thing I did after I shut this thing off was like, Google Daniel Waters' thoughts on Heather's musical. And the only thing I could find, he's probably been very diplomatically silent about it because I bet you anything he makes more money off the Heather's musical than, the paltry probably contract he signed for the little like $1 million independent film they did in 1988. With Heather's.
Right.
The only thing I find is like it was something, and it was like on one of those like Broadway websites where the creators of the Heather's musical were saying like Dan came to one of the things and he said he really loved it. And I'm like, well, of course he's gonna say that because Dan obviously is not getting a lot of work these days after Vampire Academy,
Right.
And Dan is probably very reliant on a Heather's musical residual check. I mean, maybe he really doesn't like it. I don't know. But watching what I saw and just hearing him on the DVD commentary, I don't see how.
No, I don't either.
He could not be as appalled as I was. And I'm not saying the same. I have a different opinion about the TV series, which we'll get to in a bit. But like the musical, I just don't see how, other than the fact that he maybe gets a fat check from this thing, he couldn't be like horrified.
Yeah. So it's safe to say we both hated the musical.
Very much.
But then along came a TV show which was kind of plagued with release issues. They made it into a 2018 TV series. It struggled to get released because right before they were going to release it, I think there was a school shooting, I believe. And so they rescheduled it to come on later in the year. And then another act of violence, I think, occurred on some school property. I don't know if it was another shooting or not. But then it got bumped against. Then the network that had it dropped it. And so eventually I think it ended up airing somewhere. But then even when I went to go look for the episodes, I think 10 were made. I could only find 8. I know we talked back and forth a little bit about the last 2. I don't know if you found them or not.
I found them. I had to watch them on a really janky, sketchy website that had pop-ups happening that I had to keep shutting down while I was watching the last 2 episodes. Because the last 2, I think, only played in Europe.
Ah, there you go.
Or something. They were only televised in Europe. Yeah, I mean, I did read the oral history of it with the creators after. I did make it all the way through. I liked it enough that I finished it all the way. Paramount was kind of basically trying to do a very diplomatic dump. They're like, we're going to, we put all this money into it. And a lot of the people did like the show, the non-creative people, the money people behind it. But they're like, we just can't do that. We can't take this heat.
Right.
So they kind of gave it as diplomatic of a forced release that they could. But yeah, I think the last 2, which is why it was so hard for me to find them, didn't actually air in the U.S. And you can kind of see why. I will give the Heather's TV series this. It plays hardball with some of the touchy topics, and it doesn't shy away from it, which which is kind of was surprising to me in this day and age. I thought it was going to be way more watered down than it was. But I don't know. Why don't you tell me what you thought? It sounds like you didn't make it all the way.
I did not make it. I only made it through 3 episodes. I will say the pilot was pretty bad. I did not like the pilot because it felt like it was trying to cram too much of the movie into the one episode. I'm like, how are they? This is going to be a series if you're going to go through all of the most of the stuff in the one episode. Once it got off that and it got into the second episode, I was like, it was a little better. I know they have to branch off. They're going to have more story here. Toned it down a little bit, I think, of the like trying to like remind you, hey, this is the Heathers TV show. Like, do you remember the movie? Do you remember the movie? And so it wasn't as grating. And so I made it through the 2 episodes. But what really bothered me was they changed up some things. Like they wanted to, instead of saying how very, it was how just. It was simple things like that kind of irritated me. Like they were tweaking the dialogue to make it their own, but not tweaking it enough to make it like original. It almost felt like a bad copy. Now I didn't mind the whole let's change up the Heathers. Like one was a gay guy, one was the black lesbian, and then you had the overweight Heather Chandler. I didn't mind that because it almost felt like they were taking, instead of like bullying, they were almost taking like the super woke kind of thing. It was like they were in charge of like messaging and all that, and I was like, okay, that's kind of a cool spin. It was the idea that they weren't really named Heather, like they just gave themselves nickname Heather. I like the fact that in the original movie they were all really named Heather, and I thought they didn't explain it. It was just the fact. I like that better. And again, I don't know how it all plays out because I didn't watch it, but suddenly the Betty Finn character taking on a larger role, but I didn't like some of the tweaks they were doing. And I really, really could not take the guy playing JD. I don't need someone doing Jack Nicholson. I don't need Christian Slater. But that guy just felt so boring. I'm like, God, this is the rebel. This is your angsty counterculture. Let's put an end to all this thing. And you'll probably tell me because you just said it wasn't horrible. I mean, I have horrible written down.
It gets better as it goes along. The creators, it was very a largely queer created show. Like
right.
a lot of the and it's pretty obvious. Like most of those characters are much more. I mean, they're better. Let's be honest, they're just better written than a lot of the heterosexual characters. But then on top of that, the casting of Heather and JD is pretty bland. You could tell the interest. They were more interested in playing around with the new spin on the 3 Heathers than they were in the. They sort of flailed a little. It got better, but they flailed a little bit with the JD Veronica relationship. But they did some things interestingly. Did you stick around long enough to see where their version of Veronica ended up a killer? Like she killed somebody with a croquet mallet when she was a kid.
Yeah.
And it was kind of covered up. As the show goes on, there's a little bit of a role reversal where she's doing more fucked up killing related stuff than JD is. And definitely by the end. And by the end, we kind of get a version, not exactly, we get a version of the ending that Waters really wanted with the prom in heaven. But it's definitely not a happy ending. Veronica is the guiltiest party of anyone by it. I mean, it's a shame that it's not a super charismatic actress that's playing her. Like somebody who was maybe like more of the modern day Winona, who had like a more of a handle on the sarcasm of it. I probably would have liked it a lot more. And yeah, that the JD, he does get a little bit better, but yeah, they're kind of suffering from that sort of bland YA TV vibe. Like the 3 main Heathers are, especially the guy. Like at first, your initial reaction is kind of like, are they going to be able to pull this off? But it makes sense. If you're going to make a modern day Heathers, you cannot have 3 straight white girls again. You just can't do it.
Right. No, that made sense.
And if you're going to say now, if the theory is like high school is basically now happens online, then you want your 3 Heathers to be the people who are the most like extremely online and performatively woke. So that oral history I read, it's pretty interesting. And I actually think the series is kind of, since then, has kind of become embraced a little bit and could almost kind of take on a much smaller version, but its own kind of cult. Especially if it remains hard to find this thing, that's only going to build the cult possible status of the show. I definitely liked it more than you. I don't think it's great. It definitely doesn't approach the movie. But I thought if the assignment is you have to make Heathers as a TV show in the modern day, which is kind of first of all, it's kind of like a no-win
right.
assignment. I thought they did a pretty admirable job.
All right.
As no-win as that assignment is if that makes any sense.
It makes sense. So let me just ask you this question. I have them all downloaded. Is it worth it? This is your recommendation or not. Is it worth it for me to go back and watch the remaining episodes of this series, or am I just going to get more pissed off and say, why the hell are you making me, well, not making me, why are you recommending this to me?
If you don't have like a beef with like, hey, these are not the Heathers of my youth, like if you can get over that, which it sounds like you kind of did,
Yeah,
if you're
I'm fine
like,
with
I
that.
understand why these people are the Heathers in a modern day version. It makes sense. Put it this way, I think it started to click for me that this was better than I initially thought it was, somewhere around four or five. That's not saying it's going to work. I definitely can't give it a, like, you'll love it by the time you're watching it with pop-ups flying at you on episode 9, the one that only showed in, like, the UK or whatever. You know, the only enticement I can give you is you do get a version of his original ending, which I think they actually kind of pull off, maybe even better than what it sounds like he did. But yes, there's a lot of other stuff in there that you're going to be like, I don't know. But it doesn't. It went darker than I ever thought it would.
Okay.
If that's any kind of sales pitch, I don't know. All right, so we've talked about those iterations of Heathers. Should we talk about the elephant in the room, especially now that there is a Beetlejuice 2, Beetlejuice, and the fact that Winona has been badgering Dan Waters basically for the last 35 years for a Heathers 2 sequel, even though he doesn't want to write it. And just he basically pitched her like a very tossed off version of it, just to kind of like appease her. And she tried to set it up. Did you know about this too, right?
I do. Yeah, I remember.
Okay, tell me about it. What was his pitch? Give me his pitch.
His pitch was that Veronica was older, I guess a Senate page for a senator named Heather, played by Meryl Streep. I don't remember exactly what he said, but there was like something happens where it ends up being like the assassination of the president. I don't know how JD fit into that. I think you had noted somehow like a ghost of JD.
Yeah, I read he was going to be like almost like an Obi-Wan sort of like specter or ghost.
Yeah.
Like he wasn't going to be alive, but he was going to be influencing her from the grave maybe a little bit, or
Yeah, like maybe haunting her.
Probably
in a
like
dream
the way they
sequence.
handled sort of like the dream flash,
Yeah.
like the surreal kind of stuff in the original movie.
But I think, if you want my opinion, I think that storyline would have been horrible. That to me sounds like one of those, let's put her in a whole new situation. Not that I want a sequel to be the same thing, but to me that's like, oh, we like Veronica, so let's go put her in a thing where she's assassinating the president. And that to me just sounded stupid and too big.
Yeah, I mean, it's just he's doing the exchange high school for Washington D.C. It's kind of like he's kind of doing another version like Dee did with the camp and and a vampire academy. It's like he's setting his thing in a set like system that already exists.
To me, I think the proper sequel now that everyone's older, like you said earlier, playing a mom. So the obvious one to me now would be that she has kids. The kid is in a high school. And then there you could play into the whole modern stuff like you just said what the TV show did. Try to play into whatever the modern version of the Heathers are. And you could have having her daughter go through it. Whether or not she's one of the checked out adults in this case. Because, again, you wouldn't want to make the same movie. So now you have kind of like her and her history. And maybe her kid is not like her. Or maybe her kid is a Heather. Like, that would be good. Maybe her kid's a popular kid and she doesn't like it. Or some dark twist where her neighbor's kids, she wants her neighbor's kids killed because her neighbor's kids are involved with her kid. I think you could now play with Veronica as a mom a lot more than you can with her running around DC with Meryl Streep.
I had pretty much the exact same thought, except it was college. One that's a little closer to like probably the age realism, but like when I first thought of it, I was like, no, I think Winona's aged out. Would she have? And then I'm like, wait, Brian, she's a year older than us, and Brian is dropping his daughter off at college, so it totally could work. And then it wouldn't be high school all over again, it'd be college, which is similar, but it could afford you some like ripe new like higher education, paid for private school. It can get you into a whole new realm of things to like poke fun at.
Sure.
But within the same ballpark. So I pretty much had the same exact thought as you, and I'm sure Dan Waters has probably written this version and thrown it in the trash or something before. But the question I'm asking is, well, one, would we want to see any version of a Heather sequel?
Well, we just sat through the musical and the TV show.
Forget the musical, because the musical completely missed the entire point of Heathers, if you ask me. But now that there's been a TV show which does kind of stay at least in the same tonal ballpark, whether you like it or not, is it necessary? Like, is it necessary at all?
No.
And this question is never going to be asked, other than the fact that it could be being asked now just because Beetlejuice made a lot of money.
Right.
So these questions are only ever asked when things make a shitload of money. And they're like, well, what else did Winona do that is now popular, or at least a cult item?
I find it very possible that the Heathers 2 could be put into the works now, especially after Beetlejuice. And, Mean Girls tried to do that kind of in the early 2000s, so now we're another 20 years later. What can we do? I think it's definitely got to be someone talking about it. But you're saying, is it necessary?
Do you have enough nostalgia for it that you would like to see it taken a little further, or leave well enough alone?
I mean, I'd be interested, especially if the original creators had some type of involvement with it. I don't think you could strike that balance again, that lightning in the bottle again. You can't do that. So I would fear for its success. I'll still hold off on my old Barton Fink sequel if anything's going to get one. I don't know that I would.
But we know
excited.
that Old Fink would be great.
Yes.
There's no question.
Old Heathers, I don't know if I could deal with that. What do you think?
Well, I'll answer a little differently. I will say this. If I had asked myself that question before the Heathers TV series, I would have said, sure, why not? Let's see it. What you could do with it and the treatment that the Heathers TV show got in this current day and age, and like how a Heathers movie, if it's going to maintain that sort of dark and be edgy, like can you do that nowadays? Or is it just like a complete uphill battle to try that in a sequel? I would say it's probably better left alone. So I would have answered it differently, I think, like 3 weeks ago.
Sure, I get it. I understand.
So there you go. So neither of us are very excited about Heathers 2. So Brian, we've held off for a very long time in giving our final grease-stained bow tie, or should they be grease-stained scrunchies? Red scrunchies this time. Our Heathers ratings. I know everyone's waiting for this. Should we get a drum roll, or at least some Sly and the Family Stone first before we give them? Here we go. Brian, do you want to go first? What are you going to tell me is your rating for Heathers 1989?
My rating is, I give it a golden baby Jesus. My one and only of the podcast.
You gave Do the Right Thing 4, right?
I did, yes. This is the only one I gave.
Wow, this is somewhat momentous. Brian has tossed out his first Golden Baby J.
Yep.
And probably not a big surprise. I'm tossing out my second Golden Baby J after Do the Right Thing. For Heathers, wow, that was a long and winding road to get to that.
Well, you said deep dive. There was a deep dive for you.
That was a very deep dive. We'll see how deep after the editing of this. We're done with Heathers, our last 1989 movie of the podcast. But let's stay on the goth kid tip and do our last and first all-industrial Also Ran rundown. Folks, we're back, so here we go with the all-industrial Also Ran rundown. Because the Also Ran rundown, you'll remember, it's wherein we have 2 minutes on a timer to run down other September 1989 movies of some interest that we did not choose to include as the main feature. Mainly because our main feature wasn't even from September this time. But if we watch these other ones that did come out in September, we will give them a super quick thought and a grease-stained bow tie rating. If we didn't, we'll just say pass and move on. Brian, do you have your 9 Inch Nails swatch ready to do the timing?
Yes.
Do they make 9 Inch Nail swatches? I know there were a lot of swatches in Heathers, but
sure, it's all ready to go.
Nonetheless, you have it set. It's good.
My swatch is ready.
Okay, 3, 2, 1, and start that swatch.
On September 8th, we have Kickboxer. Jean-Claude Van Damme seeks revenge in Thailand with splits, kicks, and a slew of slow-motion training montages. I gave it 2 grease-stained bow ties, 1 for the dancing and 1 for the eagle screeching.
I gave it 2.5 grease-stained bow ties. Love that eagle. On September 15th, we have Kevin Bacon as a film school grad trying to make it in Hollywood without selling out in the big picture. I gave it 2.5 grease-stained bow ties.
I give it 1 grease-stained bow tie. Very long, very not funny.
Next, we have Al Pacino hunting down a sexy serial killer who may or may not be Ellen Barkin, playing a very spooky titular love song, Sea of Love. I gave it 3 grease-stained bow ties.
Pass. On September 22nd, we had a dry white season. Donald Sutherland learns that it's tough to keep his morals intact in this South African apartheid drama. Pass.
Pass for me too. Couldn't watch that thing on Roku. Too many commercials.
Black Rain, Michael Douglas takes down the Yakuza with a mullet and a scowl in Ridley Scott's cross-cultural cop movie. I gave it 2 grease-stained bow ties. Ho hum.
I gave it the same damn thing.
Then we have Eric the Viking. Tim Robbins plays a well-meaning Viking trying to end Ragnarok in Terry Jones' adventure comedy. I gave it 3 grease-stained bow ties. Solid 80s fantasy film. I holds up well.
Damn, I gave it the same thing. 3 grease-stained bow ties. Liked it more than I remembered.
Penn and Teller get killed. The famous magic duo play endless pranks on each other in this tiresome comedy. I give it half a bow tie, mainly for that drawn-out ending.
Ooh, I gave it 1 grease-stained bow tie, and that's being very generous. On September 29th, we have Mickey Rourke as a disfigured ex-con trying to get some redemption off of Lance Henriksen and Ellen Barkin once again in Johnny Handsome. I gave it 2.5 grease-stained bow ties.
And I passed.
And hit that timer.
Look at that, 1 minute and 55 seconds.
Our final also round, we get it right under the wire. I am impressed with us. Are you impressed with us? I mean, granted, it was as many as last time, where we had 16 in the assistance of some AI. So it's a little bit less of a feat, but we were back down to 2 minutes, and we did it.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm happy. What a way to end the podcast with a successful Also Ran rundown.
Anyway, that was the Also Ran rundown, the very last ever. So sad to see it go. That's what we're playing, sad industrial goth music. And now we're going to move on into 2024, the present day, and find out what's new at the old RC/Regal, because we're going to be talking about yet another Winona Ryder starring movie, a movie that has been very long in the making, considering that the original came out in 1988. We're talking about Beetlejuice. And I'm only saying it twice because 1, that's the title, and 2, if I say it a third time, Beetlejuice would be a guest on our podcast because he would appear.
Yes, you're right. You said it 3 times, by the way.
Oh, shit. We're talking about Beetlejuice, original, loved it. I think Brian, I'm not going to speak for you, Brian. Tell me about your feelings on the 88 original Beetlejuice before we get too deep in the muck on the sequel.
Oh, yeah, I love the original Beetlejuice. It's what I think of mainly when someone would mention like a Tim Burton movie. You know, it wasn't what you normally would see in the movies back then. So, you know, instead of in a typical haunted house movie where the living people are trying to get rid of the ghosts, it's just kind of like spinning that on its head and saying now the ghosts are trying to get rid of the living people, where the living are the monsters. And I thought that was a clever twist. I watched it again before I went and saw the new one, and I'm like, well, he really isn't in the movie that much. I mean, for a movie called Beetlejuice, it really centers around the Maitlands and the Dietzes. You know, they bring in Beetlejuice as the bioexorcist to get rid of the living. But watching it again, you know what? I think all that humor still works. It's a little crude, it's a little offbeat, it's a little silly, but it's great. And I still love the movie. What about you?
Yes, I loved it as well. It was kind of like Pee-wee, which is, you know, his first movie. But I feel like Beetlejuice was more of his like, I have arrived, here is my mission statement, here is my style in full.
Yeah.
That kind of like carried through to a lot of his other movies. I mean, yeah, you got like the little Rube Goldberg and contraption stuff in Pee-wee. But he was working with Paul Rubens, who already had like an established shtick at that point. Right. So he was sort of plugging into Paul Rubens' world. Beetlejuice was like the first movie. It's like, this is Tim Burton world, full front and center. This is the good shit. This is the uncut Tim Burton shit. So like for that reason, it's among my faves in Burton land. And I also rewatched it again. Still love it. No complaints with the original. Complaints will probably be lobbied on the sequel. Which we'll get to right about now. Brian, why don't you do the honors and talk about this long-awaited sequel?
Well, first off, I would like to say that I was looking forward to seeing the movie a lot, and I think, you know, a sequel would have been fine. I mean, why not? You know, people die all the time, and I always thought of Beetlejuice as being the bioexorcist thing. So you didn't have to have the Maitlands, you know, the Alec Baldwin and Gina Davis characters. You could have him going and getting another client. So I always figured that it was kind of ripe for a kind of a of a sequel that didn't have to have all the original cast in it. So I like the character of Beetlejuice so much that makes sense to me. And so I like the fact that at the beginning of this movie, they kind of leaned into that this was his job. He had an office now, and he was like the official bioexorcist. So more of the office humor was fine, like kind of the afterlife office humor. My problem was that it took the movie a bit too long to finally get Beetlejuice back together with Lydia, the Winona Ryder character. And I was hoping to get more of that interaction and less of that world of building the afterlife. And I think that's where this movie has an issue. Burton spent too much time, like, kind of in love with his own, like, little afterlife. He looks the same as he did in 1988. I don't know if it's because of the makeup or whatever. Him being so much older, 35 years older, I thought he looked fine. I thought Winona Ryder, Catherine O'Hara, and all of them were also good. And I didn't even mind Jenna Ortega as a daughter and all that stuff. I can't go any further without mentioning the little beetle baby, or whatever you want to call him.
I called him Baby Juice.
Baby Juice. I had a beetle baby, so whichever way, I was shocked that they went full on disgusting with like the whole birth of the little beetle baby. He's running around. He's like, the ankle biting scene. I mean, I thought that was funny. I got a good kick out of that. So all that Beetlejuice stuff was funny, but then you had the kind of the actual plot of the movie. It's overstuffed with ideas, and again, I think that Burton was in love with this whole idea of growing his little afterlife world. All the characters that go nowhere. There's too many extra characters. You got Monica Bellucci, who's completely a waste in the movie. Right? I thought she was going to have a bigger role. I kind of saw some trailers, and I'm like, oh, Monica Bellucci's going to be in this. His ex-wife, Beetlejuice's ex-wife. So I'm like, oh, that might be interesting. But no, she's running around trying to find him. And at the very end, she gets eaten by a sandworm. That's it. That was fast. I'm like, what a complete waste of time. You have Willem Dafoe hamming it up as some actor cop, which, don't get me wrong, I liked him, the way he was acting, but completely unnecessary. Like the small bit role they gave Danny DeVito at the very beginning, whatever, that was fine. That's what you do. You throw some cameos at him. But other stuff with the afterworld that kind of bothered me, the whole the Soul Train gag was a little too obvious. When I heard it, I'm like, gee, I wonder what that's going to be. But then it got a lot of attention. I was like, okay.
That would have been funny in 1989. Probably.
Right. And it would have been funnier if it was 5 minutes shorter. The fact that they killed off Jeffrey Jones' character, it made sense for the movie, right? That you don't want to put the actor in there because he's now a creep. But then they had to have him die, and then they kept on bringing his character in, with his head bit off and all that. I'm like, well, if you don't want to put him in the movie, just kill him off, have the funeral, and be done with it. Why do you have to have this continued gag of the shark head thing? All that time could have been spent with Lydia and Beetlejuice with more fun and more gags. I just wish there was more Beetlejuice. For Beetlejuice, you sound like you'd have twice as much Beetlejuice.
Yeah, it sounds like I largely agree. I'm just going to read my unfiltered notes really quickly. Best scenes, Baby Juice, Beetlejuice, definitely hit the nice blend of disgusting and funny at the same time. I also had high hopes for Monica Bellucci's Dolores character stapling herself back together scene, even though that is one of the scenes where it's he definitely had to use some CGI assist on that, even though he did largely stick to practical, which is great and very welcome, and we bitch about CGI all the time. But that was one where I'm like, yeah, this was probably mostly computer done, but it looked really good.
Yeah.
She was interesting enough of a character. I'm like, I want to see kind of the Bride of Frankenstein version of Beetlejuice. I liked the sort of black and white flashback scene during their plague era wedding ceremony. That's a good scene, but then that's it. No more. And then it's just Bellucci storming around the afterlife going, "Where's Beetlejuice?" and then dies. And nothing. Yeah, she's brought up, kind of wasted. I mean, most of my beefs are not with Burton because I think his visual style is still as good as ever here.
Oh, yeah.
Most of my beefs are with the writers. They're Wednesday Smallville guys. And I did, since I knew we were deep diving into Burton, I actually watched Wednesday over the course of last month. Liked it more than I thought, but it seems when these guys were thrown into Beetlejuice land in a limited less than 2 hour movie, they were flailing a little bit. It seems like they want to do this thing, and they probably had to cut it down from this, where they're we're going to give the three generations of Dietz's women their own kind of story. And that's too much.
Yeah.
And there are parts where they're all kind of separate. It takes away from each one of them. I'm if you'd focus on one, I mean, I think you would want to focus mainly on Winona, since she was the one in the original, but at least have them mainly together for most of their stories. But there are parts, we go off, we follow like Jenna Ortega, and there's even some things in the art gallery where we follow like Catherine O'Hara, and they're separated. It diffuses the movie, and they needed to be like kind of focused more on one person, and I think that should have been Winona, regardless of whether or not hers was the most interesting story.
Should have been Beetlejuice. That's who they should have been focusing on.
Well, yeah, I mean, everyone wants more Beetlejuice. That would have gotten you to that stuff faster.
Yes.
Yeah, there just needed to be some condensing. Is this the series where you want to have multi-generational story of? I mean, it's a comedy.
Right.
It's not The Godfather. Yeah, and like Justin Theroux, I think he's okay in other stuff. Like his stuff did nothing for me. Willem Dafoe, I agree, I love him, but there's the actor turned like Deadville detective, a little stale. Yeah, there was just a lot of bad like screenwriter structural choices, I think, that added time that you didn't need to it and robbed it away from the more interesting things, like, Beetlejuice's ex-bride and
right.
Beetlejuice himself. Keaton slid right back into the role like a, warm glove, whatever you want to say. I did think he was a little more subdued and less anarchic, and it wasn't a product of age, because he seemed gung-ho, no pun intended, even though he was in gung-ho for anything in this. I think it's just he wasn't written as anarchic. He seemed like a little more ready to cut deals with the Dietzes. Of course, he always has quid pro quos, like, well, I'm going to do this for you, you got to do this for me. He seemed a little less mercenary than he did in the first movie. It seemed just like it was a little bit more watered down writing. So that was a little disappointing for me there. Too much shrunken head guy stuff. Like one shrunken head guy was funny. 30 of them, not so much.
My daughter, I took Juliana to see this, and she said it felt like they were trying to do a Minions thing.
I probably wouldn't have that reference since I've never seen Minions, but I think me and Juliana P are saying the same thing.
Yeah,
from two different generations. So good on you, Juliana P. If you listen to this, we're thinking the same. I wasn't massively disappointed, if that means anything. I was kind of like, all right. It was more like I was beating myself up. I'm like, what did you expect, dude? It's another legacy sequel.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
But like, I allowed myself to get a little more excited about this one. Anyway, so we're beating around the bush. Let's throw out some bow ties for Beetlejuice. What's your bow tie for Beetlejuice?
Well, I give it 2 grease stain bow ties.
Oh, I thought you were gonna give it the rating that we've given more than. Probably.
No, I thought about it, but I think this is just a decent movie. I would recommend it if you like Beetlejuice, but nothing more than that.
Okay, well, I gave it our old reliable, mostly given rating, which would be 2.5. So I'm a little bit above you. I definitely had fun in parts. If you're gonna go for Beetlejuice, and I just summoned him again, or does that make him go back?
Yeah, it does actually. So there you go. You're putting him back now.
Yeah, if you're gonna go for another one of these, which who knows, it could be likely. This thing's making a lot of money. Get some better writer. Get some people who aren't Smallville guys. Get Dan Waters obviously needs a job.
He needs work.
I think he could fit well into the Beetlejuice world. Burton's worked with him successfully before. Mm-hmm. Do it up. Instead of a Heathers 2, make Beetlejuice 3 a Dan Waters script. How about that? Will that make everyone happy?
Yes. Well, we'll see.
All right. Settled. Issue settled. We're done.
Case closed.
No, we're not. Sorry, folks. Sorry to excite you for a second there, like we were with Beetlejuice. Because we still got some more Tim Burton to go. We're going to do our top 5 Tim Burton rankings of all time. I'm pretty sure both of our choices are going to be in a very similar time frame of Tim Burton's career. Where they land may be a little different. So I'm excited to hear, Brian, what your top 5 Tim Burton rankings are. And of course, I want you to start with 5 and not 1, because we don't spoil things here, except for movies from 1989.
Right, but at number 5, I put Batman. Great movie, but I prefer the originality of his other movies. Number 4 is Edward Scissorhands. Before the rewatch, I thought it was going to be higher, but I still think it's a really good modern day fairy tale and all that stuff. So I still love it. Number 3, and here's where I might differ with a lot of the critics out there. I have Ed Wood at number 3. Lots of Burton style, but it's kind of a more serious, straightforward story. At number 2, I have Pee-wee's Big Adventure, which has less of Burton style, I think, but it's very funny. And as you said before, it was more his movie than Burton's movie, but it's still very funny. And at number 1, I have his Beetlejuice. I think that's the perfect balance of his style and comedy. And as I said before, it's the first movie I think of when anyone mentions Tim Burton.
Okay. Well, you're right. There is some similarity. I'm going to cheat a little bit for number 5 and give you a two-way tie. It's a two-way tie between Edward Scissorhands and Sweeney Todd.
Okay.
One is very kind of hopeful when it comes down to it, think of an outsider, and the other is like a grim revenge story. One's using a razor, a straight razor. The other is using, scissors. They're kind of flip sides. They're different, sort of the same story, slightly. Number 4, this is maybe the only contentious thing and maybe where our rankings really depart. I put Batman Returns. The first Batman didn't make the list. It was probably close. If there was going to be a 6 or 7, it would have been on there. Like, I like Batman. It's fine. You can kind of feel like he wasn't able to go full Burton. And I feel like in the sequel, he had some power then. He made everyone a shit ton of money. And he even said, like, he had, like, full director's cut. He's like, I'm going to make a Tim Burton Batman movie. And he does. And like getting Bo Welch on there, the production designer, there's no separating who directed this movie. In the first movie, there are fits and starts, especially in the Joker stuff, where it's like, yeah, it's kind of Burton-y and there's some things here and there, but there's no mistaking it in the sequel. And I just like the Catwoman, Michelle Pfeiffer just owns that movie. You know, I know there's a Penguin series coming down the pike with a very serious mob-like rending of the Penguin, but I don't want that. I want Danny DeVito's Penguin I want little fat Danny DeVito, rotund, like wobbling around, ordering penguins with like little headsets on, a penguin art. Like, that's how I want it. It's a fucking comic book. I don't want Sidney Lumet's Prince of the City set in Batman world like we got in that boring fucking Batman 3-hour piece of shit that I had to sit through. Anyway, I'm not going to get off on that. And here's where it gets very non-controversial and very similar to Brian's. Number 3, Ed Wood. I saw that movie a lot because that movie played when I was also in another theater job in New York. I saw like the ending of that movie so many times, so it's almost like a Lethal Weapon 2 thing where it's just ingrained in my DNA at this point. Number 2, Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and won't be surprised at number 1. It is Beetlejuice, Say It One Time. The OG Beetlejuice. So there you go. That was a lot of Burton, a lot of ranking. Let's switch gears, probably into a more depressing mode, and talk about, surprisingly enough, the film by somebody who Tim Burton once fired off one of his Tim Burton movies that didn't get made, that being Superman Lives. So you probably know by now, we're going to be talking about the 4:30 movie, the newest movie on this podcast, but we'll probably find out not the best, maybe the least. Why are we talking about this movie, especially as the last movie on our podcast? Well, because we have bandied about in the course of this podcast idea that possibly we would maybe one day write a Gen X multiplex movie. I don't know if it'd be called that, but it would definitely be about the days that we worked at the RC Theater. We've told a bunch of anecdotes about it. Whether or not that will ever happen remains to be seen. You know, has this podcast basically become the substitute of us ever writing that screenplay together? Maybe. I don't know. But anyway, this is the part where Brian really gets mad at me for the homework because I said, like, do we have to see this movie? We did it. We did a Gen X related podcast about guys being nostalgic and reminiscing about a job where they worked in a movie theater in the 80s. Do we have to see Kevin Smith, who unfortunately is kind of considered like almost like one of the avatars, along with like Tarantino, of like Gen X filmmakers? The guy made a movie about kids sneaking into movies in the 80s, and he's only, he's like 3 years older than us. Do we have to do this?
Apparently.
Apparently. And I think we both know what we were getting into, and neither one of us are Kevin Smith fans.
No.
But anyway, long story short, we actually both went out to the movie theater and saw his latest, the 4:30 movie, because we felt that it would at least, if anything, give rise to maybe, hopefully, some decent conversation related to whether or not if there was ever a Gen X multiplex movie, how similar or hopefully how different it would be from what Kevin Smith has delivered to us. Brian, do you want to take the baton and I'm assuming probably use it to beat the shit out of me or Kevin Smith with?
I would like to.
Word on the street is you did see this at this is maybe the last one we'll ever hear podcast-wise that you saw at our old theater, right?
Yes. So it's only playing at the theater, which was once home to the RC Movies 10, which is now a Regal movie theater. It was not playing at any other theater in town. You've heard us talk about all the old theater numbers. We've thrown those around throughout the podcast. I was in theater number 3, which is one of the smallest theaters there.
That used to be the Art House Theater.
Yeah, that was the Art House Theater.
Where they would throw Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown, Baron Munchausen.
And so they threw the 4:30 movie in there. And I will say that I was the only one in the theater. I was the only one in the theater, and I was half tempted to just hurl my drink against the wall or maybe throw something at the screen during this movie. You're right. I'm not a Kevin Smith fan. I don't like, I think, any of his movies. I know people are like, well, at least Clerks, right? You at least like Clerks. I'm like, no, I just don't like the way he writes. I don't like his winking, inside, jokey kind of movie speak. I don't like any of it.
You don't like it when characters not only continually call each other by their first names, but also their first and last names?
Yes, yeah. Got to get that in this one. Yeah, I guess it must sound cute in his head, but it comes across as grating. First half of the movie is really about them in the movie theater. 3 guys, 3 friends. They go to the movies, and they basically go into the first movie, and then they're going to go sneak into the other 2. So they go to the early show, and they spend the day going to all the other movies, sneaking into the other movies, theater hopping. He invites the girl to see the 4:30 show, and so his friends are mad that he invited a girl to go along with him. I did like the stuff when they were in the theater, when the 3 friends were hanging out in the theater, and a couple of the antics in the theater. I'm like, okay, that's mildly amusing, but this is definitely not the Gen X multiplex movie because they don't work there. There's no fun antics. The characters are a little grating. And if anything, this does not make me say, oh, well, this movie's already been made, so Matt, we got to have to, think of something else one day. But no, this yeah.
He didn't steal our thunders, definitely.
Right. Yeah, they did not steal the thunder. I mean, it's, again, but anyway, Well,
here's the thing, because it sounds like you're spiraling a little bit.
Well, no, I just wanted to say one thing about this. The dialogue is stilted and forced. There's too many inside jokes. When he starts talking like the inside movie talk, like he talks to the one girl at the theater, all that stuff is very, very forced, and I didn't like it. And then there's these hints, the way he talks about, like, oh, gee, Star Wars, that's it. They're never going to do any prequels or any TV shows. The whole winking nod to, like, future.
Yeah, there's a lot of 2024 hindsight jokes.
Yeah,
like Bill Cosby, he'll always be beloved,
right?
Like shit like that.
Yeah, all that was horrible, and so the stilted dialogue, all that stuff. The best thing about this was the runtime was like an hour and 27 minutes.
Yeah, other than music, a couple of needle drops. There's very little attempt to make it believable that it takes place in 1986. But it gets things wrong. Like the trail, like there's one trailer that's really like seems like it's a 70s grindhouse thing, which he probably would not. And it seems like he did it just so he could get that's his daughter playing a nun or with a gun or something in there. I was even having trouble figuring out what the references were. Like one of them, I'm like, I think the one in the porta potty is like maybe a riff on Critters or something from the 80s. The thing is, like, since Clerks, he's never not made a student film. Like, all his movies have been student film. Like, he's never gotten any better. Like, there's been no progression since Clerks. And he keeps going back to that same tired well, and spoiler, he does at the end of this movie again.
Yep, oh yeah, yep.
Like, he should be, his director card really should be taken away after this movie because he literally ends the movie unless you stick around for the really bad blooper reel, which I unfortunately caught on the way out.
Oh, yeah, me too.
He, like, parks us right at the end, like, in the front of the Clerks store. Like, oh my God, there's already been 3 Clerks. Like, did anyone even see the third? Are you seriously, like, threatening us with going back to that goddamn convenience store again? Please.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like he's not improved, definitely not visually. All his movies look like poorly shot like sitcoms. This one no different. Like I think there was a point somewhere in the middle of his career where he was trying to at least work on the visual stuff. And like he shot like something that looked a little closer to a movie. Like I like his like stand-up type things where he talks about making movies way better than watching any of his movies. Like I think he's as a personality, and this is probably why he's been allowed to continue to make movies because he's probably really good in a room, because he tells good anecdotes, and he seems like a relatively likable guy. And I feel bad that he's had a couple heart attacks, but I don't know if that's an excuse his terrible movie making stuff. But like I'm not slamming him as a person. I've never listened. I'm just based on the fact that he tells stories better than he makes movies. I'm guessing his multiple podcasts that are smodcasts that he has are probably okay. Yeah. I've never listened to any of them just because I'm just not interested in that world at all. But man, I have seen very little progression in his first movie was 94, in the basically 30 years that he's been making movies. And this is, the same thing, just kind of across the board. Damn, should we throw out some probably very low bow tie ratings?
I give it 1 grease stain bow tie.
Oh, that's kind of generous.
Yes, it is. It is.
I thought we were all revved up for a Diet Coke bomb. Brian's last Diet Coke bomb.
No, it would have been fitting, but no, I've seen worse.
I'm not quite hurling that Coke bomb either, and I don't know why. If you press me on this, I won't have a great answer, but I'm giving it half a bow tie.
Oh, there you go.
And if you say, like, what's the half a bow tie for? I don't know, maybe the movie Bacon? The kid who had, like, got bacon made for his movie? But they're really, like, there's nothing really in it that's funny, clever. There's only a lot of, like, cloying and annoying things. Wow. What a note to end on.
Right.
A big Kevin Smith stink bomb, which, yes, is relevant, very relevant to our podcast. Did it sour us completely on making a Gen X movie? Will there ever be a Gen X movie? It's a lot of work. No matter what does happen or doesn't ever happen on the Gen X movie front, just like we promised way back in May, this prequel podcast is definitely over for good. We're going to end this the proper way. We're going to end it the Heather's way. We're going to march right down into the Gen X multiplex boiler room. Yes, folks, there is a boiler room, and it's right just below the snack bar. We're going down there right now. Let's start making our way down there. We're going to plant at least one Norwegian and a pack of thermals down there, and we're going to detonate the whole Gen X shebang a la Dan Waters' original ending of Heather's. So, Brian, open that door for me.
There you go.
And,
right this way.
All right. You lead the way. I think you know the boiler room a little better than me. I think you had to go down and get some of that flavor call seasoning at one point, right, when we were working back there in '89.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So you kind of know your way around. Go around that corner. See that corner right there? Yeah, go around there.
So those carbonation canisters is what we need. That'll blow up.
Yeah. You got the flashlight, right?
Yeah,
So
I got it right here.
Oof, it's very smelly down here. It's definitely depressing, that's for sure.
Baby movie drool. Movie baby drool.
Oh, there's big puddles of it. Look at it. All right,
nasty.
so we found those canisters.
Yeah, they're right over here. Let's use these right here.
Okay, so everyone knows by now, you are numbers. So,
Yeah.
so it's only proper that you're in charge of attaching the bomb, setting the countdown clock. So I'll let you. Why don't you do that right now, and I'll just stand back here and observe.
All right, no, I'm gonna put the bomb right here. Look right here. I'm gonna strap it right here, and I think that would do the trick here. This nice Norwegian down here. We'll set off some thermals upstairs at the snack bar.
Don't be stingy with the tape. Make sure to tape it around there a couple times.
Here you go. No, you don't want it to fall off. Here you go. A couple times. Here you go. Let me. Hang on a second. I gotta set it for you. What do you want? You want 30 seconds? Does that sound good?
That's the normal time, right? That's the normal time. I mean, in Heather's, I think it was like 2 minutes, but they kind of cheated with that a little bit.
Yeah, that's it.
30 seconds is good. That gives us enough time to evacuate, right?
Should give us. Well, we gotta go back up those stairs, but let's just do 30 seconds. What the hell? Here we go.
Wait. So we might not even have time to evacuate. You know what? Why don't we just stay down here? We just, talked for nearly 2 hours about a movie about teenage suicide. Is it, appropriate and right and just for us to go down with the sinking Gen X ship?
Yeah, you know what? Well, I guess it's too late now because I've already set a timer, so...
Oh, shit. Well, you've locked us into this. Oh, my God. We didn't really discuss this beforehand. Oh, no.
That's
Jesus.
too late now.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Corn nuts!
A little boy, I asked my father, what will I be? Will I be handsome? Will I be rich? Here's what he said to me. Que sera, sera. Whatever will be, will be. The future future's not ours to see. Que sera, sera. What will be, will be. When I grew up and fell in love, I asked my sweetheart what lies ahead. Will they have rainbows day after day? Here's what my sweetheart said. Que sera, sera. Whatever will be, will be. The future's not ours to see. Que sera, sera. What will be, will be. Now I have children of my own. They ask their father, what will I be? Will I be pretty? Will I be rich? I tell them tenderly. Que sera, sera. Whatever will be, will be. The future's not ours to see. Que sera, sera. What will be, will be. Que sera, sera.
In heaven, everything is fine.
Brian, where are we?
I don't know. It looks like the old RC theaters, but different.
I mean, there's still 10 theaters, but they're only playing the movies we liked.
And there's no dirty movie baby drool this time.
I mean, look at the marquee. Miami Blues, Lethal Weapon 2, Do the Right Thing, Barton Fink, Quick Change.
There's Slacker, Terminator 2, Goodfellas, Pump Up the Volume, Frankenhooker.
Look, and there's Jeff by the door. He's got his old cop mustache again. He's riding on the back of the Career Opportunities hobby horse with Jennifer Connelly.
And there's the other Matt B with the 1T. He's in the snack bar dancing to Madonna with his drink cup cone bra.
Look, it's Jack Cruz.
He's waving to us. I think he wants us to follow him. But where?
I don't know, up to the projection booth?
Who do you think's up here?
I'm not sure, but if it's a Capuchin leading the way...
Seriously? Could it be him?
I mean, we've never actually met him in the flesh, only on Skype.
Not that this is flesh exactly.
Look, behind the curtain. Is that really him?
Could it be?
What's he threading up?
Wild at heart, maybe.
No, you morons. It's a double feature of Problem Child 2 and Ghost Dad.
David? David Lynch? But you're not... What year is this?
Well, it sure ain't 1989, Brian P.